It's time to talk Gonzaga basketball.
Get ready.
It's the Spokesman-Review Zags Insiders Podcast.
Here we go.
Happy Monday, everybody, and welcome back to the Zags Basketball Insiders Podcast. Jim Mahan with Richard Fox. I cover the Zags for the Spokesman-Review for about the last 15 years, full-time basis, and Richard is an analyst for Gonzaga television broadcasts on SWX, KHQ, and Root. And we were both working last week in the LA area as the Zags had maybe one of their better 3-day stretches, you could say, in a long time. If you're going to draw it up, they went to LA, they avenged the loss to Loyola Marymount. They learned that the ESPN Game Day is coming Saturday to the Kennel for the every Saturday morning. That show's a 2-hour show, kind of sets the table for basketball that day, and the big game that night, St. Mary's and Gonzaga, which probably will decide the WCC title. The selection committee on Saturday morning put Gonzaga at 15th overall, a 4 seed in its preliminary rankings. And then the Zags outscored Pepperdine 97-88 on Saturday night. So the last one probably wasn't quite the way you draw it up on paper, but it ended up in the win column. So we're going to recap those road games, look ahead to St. Mary's. But first, let's talk about game day. It's a big deal in the college basketball world. They kind of rotate or visit different campuses, I should say, on the morning of big games there in the afternoon or evening. And it's kind of a sought out deal. You want to be part of it. You want to have the game day crew come to your school. Richard, I think you missed game days when you're at Gonzaga. I think the first one was 2006. You were done by then. But I'm sure you've kind of watched from afar the impact and when game day comes to campus and kind of the hype and hoopla that follows it. How big a deal for the Zags to have them coming Saturday?
Oh, I think it's a big deal, especially this season, just because there has been, and we've talked about it. The conversation to some degree has been, this hasn't been the typical Gonzaga team that we've seen the last few years. And lo and behold, here we are going to the last weekend of the schedule, and they've got a chance to at least get a share of the conference championship on their home floor. And to have game day here, just it draws a lot of eyes. It's certainly, as a player, I would presume you get a little bit more juice, if that's even possible, given what's going to likely be at stake on Saturday night. But from a program perspective, it's a lot of eyes on you. From a recruiting perspective, I think it could be enormous. I would presume that they've got recruits hopefully scheduled to come up for this weekend, given it's St. Mary's GU, and the Kennel generally is going to be pretty live in that scenario anyway. But now you add game day to the mix. I think it can have a big impact, not just for the rest of the year, but depending on how it works with recruiting moving forward too.
Well, looking forward to that. Looking forward to that game Saturday night. But a lot of things to get through before we get to that point. So one other quick thing we should mention: the Zags are now number 12 in the AP poll. That came out this morning. That's one spot better than a week ago. St. Mary's is 15. I'm doing my research. I got to figure out if this is the first time they've both been top 15 teams in the rankings. I'm not sure if they had. I can't remember offhand what they were before the game in Moraga. I think the Zags were higher. Gales maybe 18th, but don't hold me to that. And I think the highest I could find for a St. Mary's ranking ever was 11th. But again, I'm researching. Those aren't set in stone. So we'll get to the bottom of that. But first, let's kind of take a look back at the seedings that came out from I call it the selection committee. I know they've got a fancier name in the NCAA manual, but I can't go there. The selection committee had the Zags 15th overall. I was St. Mary's didn't make it. They were just outside. But I was a little surprised Arizona's the number 2 in the West. They trail UCLA in the standings, Pac-12, I think by a couple games. But I think that's where you get the non-conference impact. You've got Arizona beat Tennessee, if I remember. They won the Maui with a great field, won the tournament. UCLA has some good wins as well, but I think they're at 2 in the East. My guess is the Zags, if they run the table, they beat the Gales, maybe do it again in Vegas, no slip-ups along the way, I think they could maybe get to a 3. Because those top teams are going to be beating each other in the end of conference play and then in their tournaments. That's always a bloodbath because everybody's playing for some of the underdogs are trying to make the field. But I think they can get to a 3. What do you think the ceiling is for the Zags there? But kind of interesting with the Zags and Arizona in the same bracket. A lot of winning to do before we get to see the matchup everybody wants to see. But interesting that they're both in the West right now.
Yeah, I think Lenardi has them as a 3 seed too. I mean, you try to gauge where they might end up from a variety of sources. Obviously, the tournament committee is going to be source number 1. But I agree with you. If they can get the win, they can sweep the weekend, including the win against St. Mary's, win the conference tournament. I think they're going to be no worse at 3. I just their non-conference resume. They got the 3 and 4 in quad 1 wins. But one of those wins is obviously against Alabama, who's going to be a 1 seed, and that's the benefit of front loading your schedule like that. It's partly necessity, but also just Coach Few's, it feels like most years it's more aggressive than the year before. We've got to push the envelope with this, and I think sometimes the benefits of that you start seeing. You're obviously going to see the benefits of that once you get into the tournament and you're looking for that seeding, and it's helped to think a bit that certainly that St. Mary's has been as good as they are, but LMU, despite the fact they didn't play as well as they certainly would have liked on Thursday, they've got some good wins. We've got, I want to say there's 4 teams in the top 100 of the net ranking.
It's 5, and it's
5,
about 105 now. I think LMU dropped out of the top 100. Okay, you're right there.
Yeah. I just don't. The league isn't the drag it was 10 years ago.
Yeah. Alabama, we should mention, was number 1 overall seed in the net, or not in the net, in the NCAA's selection committee's rankings on Saturday. By about 2 hours after that, I bet those seedings had changed because you already had some teams going up and down on Saturday games. So take that what it is, but generally that holds up pretty well in terms of the top seeds. Gonzaga, I think, has had 5 of those in the prelim show and then stayed there for March Madness. And even in the top 16, there's not a ton of movement, more so at the bottom where a lot of teams are trying to crack that top 16. Well, let's go back through the week that was. I traveled to LA on Saturday, caught a ride with fellow sports writer Theo Lawson to the game, Ubered back to the hotel, and in between, Gonzaga roughed up LMU, complete domination in the first half. Team that had beat them in the kennel, 68-67, I think last month. But the way the Zags came out offensively, defensively, intensity, there were so few defensive breakdowns in that game. They were just on it from the moment they hit the court, especially in that first 20 minutes. And look, that's a team that had 17 wins, probably going to play in a postseason tournament, maybe not the big dance up unless they pull some upsets in Vegas, but they could finish strong and maybe get to an NIT or one of the other tournaments. They beat Gonzaga, they beat St. Mary's. They're not going to be confused with Alabama and Texas and Purdue and all the teams the Zags played, but it's still a very good team. And the building was packed. It was ready to go. I think they thought they were in for a special night, sweep the Zags. I can't remember the last time that's been done, probably 2 decades or more. And they lined up outside the building. I've never seen them do that in the 15 years I've covered them. And then the Zags just took it to them. I was almost blown away by how sharp the Zags were, and there were just no lags. What'd you see Thursday night?
Well, I mean, they had 68 in the first half. They scored 67 up here in a loss. You know, every year you have call it 2 games where you have an out of body experience, and then you've got 2 games where you're playing in mud. You just don't have it that night. And this was obviously one of those games where they weren't on planet Earth with how well they were playing. I to start with the offense first. I mean, to shoot, I think they ended up over 71% for the field. At one point, I think you were telling me down in LA, they were shooting over 80.
Yeah, it was close to 80. Yeah.
From the field. To be up 40 points in the first half, it's as good as I've seen them look offensively. The way the ball moved, all 5 guys in motion. They swung the ball. They made quick decisions. And I know we'll talk about Julian down, a little bit later in the show, but I mean, he just couldn't miss. I think he had 2 4-point plays. I mean, one 4-point play. I can't recall in the first half. I mean, he shot one 9 feet behind the 3-point line, just on a standstill. I mean, when a guy's feeling it, he's feeling it. I was really impressed with Bolton, offensively and defensively. You look at what Rozier's done the last 4 games. He's averaging 15 and just shooting the ball really, really well. Double digits 7 of the last 9. Watson, same thing. He's become a really consistent piece of what they're doing. And then defensively, we talked about it going into the week in the last show, Jim. What were they going to do defensively to try to slow Shelton down? If you watch that game, he had very little. There were very few opportunities for him to go one-on-one coming out of that pick and roll. And I'm struggling to remember a time where we either saw Watson or Timmy get isolated on him. Yeah. They really were deliberate in just holding that hedge, allowing Bolton or Salas to recover, and then more often than not, they just kept the big there and forced him to get rid of it and had someone else like Anderson try to make a play or whoever it might be. It was. You couple both of those things, even if Gonzaga hadn't shot the ball, if they had been shooting it the way you would have expected them throughout the course of, to the level they have been throughout the course of the year, I still think they're up by 15, 20. Their defense was that good. And we've been talking about that is putting together those stretches. And that's about as long a stretch defensively in that first half where I've seen them dialed in maybe all year.
Yeah. And I think that's the kind of score. I mean, 68 to 28, I think,
yeah,
and then 108 65. I mean, I just would have never envisioned it. Say that happens against Pepperdine, and or San Diego or one of the teams near the bottom of the standings. You may not take it for what it's entirely worth. Against LMU, that to me was pretty impressive because, like I mentioned, they're a nice club. They've got some good pieces. They've got some good bigs, but they aren't Pepperdine on the offensive end in terms of that individual talent. Now they have a lot of things Pepperdine doesn't have. They've got the big, strong guys, experienced 4th and 5th year guys that can get on the glass, can guard you a little better and all that, which kind of made it impressive what the Zags did offensively. So to do it in that environment, I think had to give them a lot of confidence. A couple nights later, they go over to Malibu, just down the PCH, and getting another track meet. I didn't know if those days were behind them. The close games were behind them after what they did Thursday, but they were back in full effect. And all due respect, as I said, Pepperdine has 4 guys, at least 4 guys, offensively that are very nice players. Long, agile, can shoot it. The big can shoot it. Javon Porter, Houston Millette, Mike Mitchell, and Javon Porter. Maxwell Lewis is a projected first-round guy. Not the easiest matchups. Put that out up front, but I wasn't quite expecting the full track meet we got, but it was for 40 minutes again, wasn't it, against Pepperdine?
Yeah, that was a lot of fun. That was a fun game to call. Look, if you had sat down, I think, with Romar and his staff before the game and said, "Look, you're going to out rebound Gonzaga.
Yeah.
You're only going to turn it over 10 times." And keep in
Once
mind,
in
this
the
is
second half, one
right.
turn.
They not 9 in the first half. They really cleaned that up. They were averaging 14 turnovers a game going into the GU game. You're going to have 3 guys score over 20, and Lewis, Houston, and Porter. And Mitchell didn't shoot the ball well, but he had 7 assists. He had an impact. You would have been jumping up and down saying, "I think we got a chance to win it," and that's what we saw. But it's just, I thought Coach Few's comment at the end of the game was really telling, or rather, on the money. Sometimes you got to have toughness offensively. What Timmy did in the second half, 22 of his 34, he was just unguardable. I thought Pepperdine in the first half did a decent job of at least mixing it up with the doubles. I think they stayed too long on that single coverage with him. And they just, in those pick and rolls, Pepperdine was content to switch. And you just, time after time, you saw Timmy just keep whoever it was, Millette or Mitchell, on his hip and just kind of post up right, get right under the rim, just wait for the shot to go up or maybe for the ball to come back to him. And he had, 3 offensive rebounds, I think, there in the second half. He was, caused all kinds of problems. And I think the toughness Few's talking about is best captured in what Strother did. He starts 0 of 5 in the second half after going crazy in the first half, including knocking down the 3 to end the first half after he gets fouled. But then he makes his last 2 shots in the second half. That toughness, he stays engaged. I'm not sure he may have taken those shots 8 weeks ago, but I don't know if he would have had much confidence that they were going to go in. He took those little floaters, which has become such a big part of his game, with so much confidence. He expected those to go in. He knocked down a couple really big ones, and he was obviously phenomenal over the course of the weekend. But I thought those were 2 really telling possessions for him. So, yeah, I mean, that's sometimes you got to outscore them, and that's what I think Gonzaga ultimately did. Was just effectively they had a little bit more firepower, and it was a really impressive effort.
Yeah, they had the 2 big guns for sure. When it came to firepower, they had Timmy with 34, Strother with 28. They each took turns. One handled the first half, one handled the second half. Hey, before we get back to Strother, one of the highlights of the evening for me was after the game, doing post-game interviews. I start to walk back to right, and I don't know if you're a Yellowstone fan, Foxy, but Neil McDonough plays one of the Beck brothers, who I think is now deceased on the show. That show, not a lot of folks live other than the main cast, but he was there standing outside Gonzaga's locker room. I recognized him immediately. Of course, didn't say anything, but he was standing there, I think, with his wife, who has some connections to Spokane somehow. So anyway, I had to do a double take. Kept me about a minute from writing. Lost a minute there. But are you a Foxy? Are you a Yellowstone guy or no?
No, I can't say that we've gotten into that show.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I guess it meant more to me then. But anyway,
I'm really, really happy for you.
Yeah, it was a big moment. So let's move on. We've kind of talked in the past about that ability for the Zags to get a consistent second option. Different guys have popped up at different times throughout the year. Julian obviously was the closest in that 13, 14 point range. And I will confess, a week ago in the Gonzaga Rewind that I write most Mondays, I had mentioned that he had a big night, 28 against BYU on Saturday. And I mentioned that he was kind of coming off a mini slump. He'd had 3 games, averaged 10 points, I believe, after scoring 40 against Portland. So kind of that roller coaster in there. And man, these last 3 games, 28, 26, and 28, hitting threes at over 50%, hitting most of his free throws, hitting most of his field goals. In my mind, what he's done to the level he's done it, those are the 3 highest scoring games he's had since outside of the 40, which was his career high. He's hitting that floater. It just looks like a layup to him. and he's getting all the way to the rim. That hasn't been the case as much earlier in the season. He's getting to the rim and finishing. And I kind of thought they flipped roles. I thought Strother was so good in the first half in some ways because Timmy was commanding some attention. Maybe not as much as he always does, but I thought that played into it. And then it reversed in the second half. I thought they were kind of working on Julian a lot, and that opened up Timmy's second half a little bit. At least that's what Timmy told me after the game too. So do you think that second option debate has been settled? And in some ways, the kid was the first option a lot of times and should have been the last couple of weeks because he was taking the pick and roll and doing something with it, let alone his spot up shooting. Is that put to bed and kind of give the team a little more confidence knowing that they've got, two big guns and guys around them that can do some things too?
Yeah, well, I mean, look, he's the guy to step up and be that guy, and he's done that obviously the last 3 games, and he's averaging like I think you said 28 a game. He's shooting the ball really efficiently. That floater, I don't know what you call that shot, quite frankly, because he'll pull that. He'll get into that shot at the free throw line. It's almost like a push shot floater. It's really interesting that he's so comfortable. It's just unorthodox. Given the fact that he'll take it that far out from the rim with the confidence that he has. I love the fact he's getting to the line, 18 free throws attempted the last 3 games. So it's not just, I think early in his career, and even parts of the start of this year, he was so dependent on the 3-point shot. It could get frustrating at times because he is, he's all a 6'7". He's a big kid. He's got a knack for getting around guys. And he's not bad in a pick and roll. So when he gets his head down, puts his mind to it, he can get into the lane and make the play. Typically trying to score, but he just wasn't doing that as often as maybe you thought he should. And I think the free throw attempts is indicative of the fact that he's looking to do that. You need that versatility on the offensive side of the ball, where it's not just as good as Drew is. He's an all-time guy at this program. And by the time this season's out, we might be talking about him in a more historical context if he gets a 3rd All-American selection. And he's been consistent all year. Everybody's going to have 2 or 3 games in the course of a season where they don't play as well, the numbers aren't quite there. But if you look through these box scores, it's been Timmy every night has had an impact. We have not been able to say that about anybody else on this roster. You go into games, you just don't know who's going to be there. I think starting at the start of conference play, Anton kind of figured it out. You look what he's doing, averaging effectively 13 points a game, 6 rebounds in conference play. Night in and night out, what he's going to get to. Rozier is starting to turn a corner and has been more consistent. And if you get a guy, if Strother can be that guy, if you just take his average the last 6 games, he's averaging 19 a game. Yeah. That's a hell of a sidekick to have if you're Drew. And the last thing I would say about it, it makes, as hard as Gonzaga is to defend, and as much as they score, regardless of who the second guy is, from a game plan perspective, it's much more complicated if you have to focus your attention. You have to focus your game plan on another guy, and that guy's on the perimeter. It just makes Drew's life that much easier. So I think it really bodes well for GU. He doesn't need to average 28 a game to have that kind of impact, like I said. But if you can pencil him in for being aggressive, getting to the line, shooting at a high clip, he doesn't need to shoot 60% from the field, but just shoots it effectively, efficiently. I think it kind of changes GU's world a little bit when you get into the tournament. It just makes it really difficult to defend them.
No, you're dead on. I mean, I think they've become a much more dangerous postseason team because of Strother, elevating his game. I mean, they got 2 guys who can get 30. Not many teams can say that. They got 3, 4 more guys who can go get 15 to 20 on any given night and average 10, 11, 12, whatever. that's no picnic to defend. And I asked Timmy about it. I'm probably going to write about it this week a little bit. Timmy's assist numbers are just way beyond any big in that. I went back to 95, and I don't think there's anyone even close. And beyond that, just the parts around him, he's kind of the hub of the wheel, are just getting better and better as the season goes on. Rozier's more consistent. Anton's had a great season. You can get Malachi and get 15 a night, on certain games. So I think it's kind of changed the outlook of what they can do in the postseason. Again, we've said this 8 million times. If that defense can just make the incremental game or two, I think they become a little more dangerous in March Madness and a Sweet 16, and is in the cards, and maybe even beyond. So we'll see. They've got work to do in that area.
They got a lot of and they have plenty of flaws, and no team is perfect. Yada yada yada. And Bolton's been great, but you need to be able to absorb a game where he doesn't shoot the ball well. Anton's been great, but you need to be able to absorb a game where maybe he doesn't chip in offensively the way that
foul trouble or something. Yeah,
whatever. What you need is a second guy that's not Drew Timme, that going into a game is going to score for you. Put foul pressure on the defense. Is a guy that occupies the attention of the game plan. Because when Drew has that kind of counterweight on the offensive end, and all of a sudden he's getting 15 possessions a game, where 12 to 15 where he's single covered, he's going to go score 20 plus. But if I can focus everything I'm doing on how to slow him down, and then I'll figure out the rest, and even let's get to the second media timeout and figure out if any of these guys are going to score, and then focus on that guy. But if you go into a game and we cannot leave Strother alone. It doesn't just open up for Drew; it opens up for Rozier. I think you saw that a bit against LMU. His ability to kind of weave through the defense. He's not drawing a lot of help from the perimeter because he's driving, and there's Strother on the wing. There's Smith on the wing, guys who can knock down the shot, and he was so good and so clever around the basket. So, no, it's been a really promising development for Gonzaga, certainly.
Yeah, no question. Big week ahead here, Foxy. We've got Thursday night, San Diego. Steve Lavin, the former UCLA coach and TV analyst, back in the saddle with the Toreros. He's got an interesting team. He's got a bunch of transfers. Had some before he got there, but he brought in a few more. His team is much like the rest of most of the teams in the WCC. Score it pretty good. Not as good defensively. They're somewhere around 78 points scored a game, 80 given up a game. Sounds like familiar numbers with a lot of teams in this league. Net ranking is somewhere in the low 200s. So I think a lot of people are going to write this one off and just move on to Saturday, but the Zags can't afford to do that. And they've got to deal with a couple of guys in particular that are probably going to be a challenge just because of their size and their style. Marcellus Earlington, St. John's transfer. He's about 6'7", 230. Eric Williams, 6'7", 195. He's an Oregon transfer. Those guys are good for about 32 a game, 16 plus boards. Heck, Williams, I think, had a 43-point game early on. In that wing area, small forward area, Earlington's more of a stronger power guy in there. I think those are going to be the challenges for Gonzaga, and obviously the challenge for the Toreros to somehow try to hold Gonzaga down, the top-ranked offense and scoring and field goal shooting. That's their deal, but I think the Zags deal always goes back to the defense, and those two in particular. What do you make of the matchup?
I mean, look, they could score. They've got 4 guys in double digits. They're all perimeter players. 5 guys shoot a pretty good percentage from the three-point line, so they can get going, but they're last in the league in defensive field goal percentage. I mean, you're not going to beat Gonzaga trying to outscore them. So, they've got some size on the perimeter that's a little unique for our league, with Williams and Earlington. that could be kind of interesting to watch, just because Gonzaga doesn't necessarily have, as big as Gonzaga is, they're not 6'7", 6'8" on other than Strother. But yeah, the challenge for Gonzaga is not overlooking them, because I'm doing it right now.
Yeah.
Like, you're just thinking about Saturday, and those are the scariest games. Just because there's game days in town, it's everyone's thinking going into the night it's going to be for the league. How do you stay dialed in? I'll be really interested to see Gonzaga's approach. Is this a game with 15 minutes left in the second half, or is this over with 5 minutes left in the first half? Their approach will be really interesting to watch.
Yeah, I would think with the good vibes of how they've been playing here recently, and kind of the emergence of offense around Drew, the options, and just the fact that there's only a couple games here before the postseason, I would think they'd be dialed in, but they'll have to show it on Thursday. They can't move ahead. We can, Foxy. We're going to Saturday.
I know. I love this. It's the best part about this gig.
It's the benefit of being in the media. We do that all the time. Coaches can't do it. Players can't do it. Or if they do, they pay for it.
Right.
Saturday in the Kennel, St. Mary's. Mentioned there, I think they're 15th, 7th in the net. This is a very good basketball team, a unique team. We know all the traits they have. They shut you down. They extend the shot clock on offense, 3-point shooters, toughness on defense, wall you off, make you shoot over. So you're going to have to prove yourself against them, either from the 3-point line or even in the paint. They've had an excellent year. They held off San Diego 62-59 last week. They beat BYU by 6 at home. They don't blow folks out very often, but they are as steady as you can get. And they've had some success against Gonzaga, not nearly as much as vice versa. The Zags have dominated the series, but the Gales have proven they can break through too. That environment on Saturday,
oh my God,
day, with the rival, with both ranked, with the title implications, if it comes to that, which I'm going to jump the gun. I'm thinking it will. I don't think we'll have seen anything like that in several years in the Kennel on Saturday.
I was trying to think about that. And I had people, I believe it or not, I've had some people text me asking me if I could get them tickets to the game. I'm like, what? I mean,
I'm trying to get one myself.
I can't get one. So, yeah, I mean, that'd be kind of a fun exercise to go back through the history of the McCarthy Center and see what games might rival that. I imagine St. Mary's would be on whatever list gets put together.
North Carolina, but it wasn't North Carolina wasn't.
And I was at that.
Yeah, you know?
I was at that game, and it was a lot. It was exciting just because it's Carolina, but that Carolina team was so bad.
Yeah.
Cole Anthony was hurt. They were were really young. That Carolina team, I'm not just saying this, they would not have finished top 3 in the league that year. They were that bad. And then so the excitement going into the game is one thing, but the question is, are we going to have a better live environment during the course of a game? Has there ever been one? Because that it's just going to be absolutely crazy. So yeah, I'll be watching it from my couch. No one asked me for tickets. I don't have any.
Yeah. Are you doing Thursday's game?
No.
No. Okay.
I got the Chicago State game.
Okay, gotcha. Well, anyway, the Gales have just had a nice season. They've got nice veteran, steady, solid players. They shoot the 3 a little better. They've got good size inside with Saxon and Bowen and Vessels off the bench, I think, and they just have a lot of nice pieces. And the way Randy organizes and moves them on the chessboard, you have to give him his credit. He's done a remarkable job. It's one of the best stories on the West Coast, and it kind of gets dwarfed by what Mark's done with Gonzaga.
Yeah, in any other league, it's just what Gonzaga's done. It's just it's just beyond anything anybody I think would have ever tried to, could have anticipated. But St. Mary's. I love your comment about just their approach. I mean, this is a mature group. You know, they really only play 6 guys, but they're either at or at the top of the league in rebounding, block shots, offensive rebounds, defensive field goal percentage, 3-point field goal. I mean, no matter, they know every night we're going to guard and we're going to rebound.
Yeah.
And it's the offensive side that has been, I think, a bit more challenged for them. You know, Mahoney's probably the most dynamic offensive player, most well-rounded. I don't think that's a stretch. Johnson, to me, is the key. And, you know, he doesn't shoot the ball well, doesn't shoot it at a high clip. And down in Moraga, he really struggled. And then he just he made enough shots and enough plays towards the end of regulation and overtime. The combination of him and Mahoney, but he's got the ability to go off, and he's playing as well as anybody. I mean, he's the odd game against San Diego. He had 3 points in 31 minutes, only took 3 shots, but in take that one out. 3 of the last 4 games, he's averaging 30 a game. Yeah. He's been really, really. This is all since Gonzaga and St. Mary's played. He's averaging 30, almost 31 a game. Shooting better than 61% from the field, and he's making threes. Not taking a ton of them, but he's making a good percentage. It'll be really interesting. It's one thing, I think, at your place to muck it up and find a way to Gonzaga was on the cusp of kind of breaking out that game, but because of that defensive rebound, St. Mary's was able to keep tethered to GU. I don't think that works in Spokane. You know, that 8 to 10 point cushion Gonzaga was able to kind of work, establish down in Moraga. That's 15, 16, 17 points up in the Kennel. And even with Johnson scoring like that, that's the one thing, if you're St. Mary's, I think you're concerned about is if we let Gonzaga get away from us with all the emotion and the environment, and all the pressure that's on the game, if they get out early, I'd be worried we don't have enough offensively to make up the difference. Because even if you slow Gonzaga down, they just score it too well. They're not going to go on a drought for 7 minutes where they get 3 or 4 points. They're going to find a way to score baskets. So it's going to be fascinating. I mean, I have to think Gonzaga felt like they should have won the game down in Moraga. That was the approach that we saw at LMU after losing the game up here. I'll be very interested to see the first 10 minutes of the game will be really telling, in my opinion, to see whether or not St. Mary's has a chance.
Well, you're right. And those 10 are probably bigger for St. Mary's than Gonzaga.
Well, yeah, 100%.
If the Zags come out, and kind of put it on them early, St. Mary's not really built for the big comeback type game,
right.
Score 45 in the second half, and that's not the way they're built. Now the issue is doing that, because they give up points. It's like a personal offense to them to score on it. So, but that's what makes the matchup great, makes the rivalry great. They're so different. You couldn't ask for polar opposite teams. Gonzaga wants to get up and go and reach the 80s and 90s. St. Mary's wants to slow it down and work the shot clock and
so
the 60s or 50s.
I'm interested in this question, and coaches like Mark Few and Randy Bennett. If you're in a place long enough, your program is going to reflect you in a way, right? How you see the game, how you play the game. But I'd be interested to know from Bennett if early on he made the conscious decision, even if it leaned towards his preferred aesthetic and style of play, that there's no way we're going to ever beat Gonzaga trying to play the way they do. So we have to do something completely different. Because you're absolutely right. You could not have, if you and I had to describe the polar opposite of what Gonzaga typically is, we would land on something close to what St. Mary's is today.
Yeah, and that's why I always love the games, because sometimes they'll just be played the way Gonzaga wants to play. Sometimes, and more often than not, probably a little towards St. Mary's, just because it's, I'd say, easier to rein the tempo in than vice versa. But Gonzaga's, had the upper hand in the series. But the Gales have shown that formula will give Gonzaga fits every couple of years, and this is one of those years. So looking forward to it. Foxy, wish you were there. Would be fun to see you at that game as well. I'm sure you can finagle a ticket. I got faith in you. He can.
Well, I mean, maybe one of our listeners would like to invite me, and I'll sit next to him and give him my insight. They can get a preview of the Zags Insider podcast for Monday.
The Richard Fox experience coming to
There we go.
Craigslist in 5 minutes. Yeah. Anyway, well, thanks to everybody for joining us. You can find us on Spotify, Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. Spokesman.com is the newspaper website. Click on the Zags icon. You can find us there. You can find our past podcasts. And you can also find all of our Gonzaga coverage. There's no shortage of it on there. So I appreciate you dropping by. We'll see you next Monday.